What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Legacy Investor Podcast. I'm Cameron Philgreen, and I'm drinking an Ethiopia Gara, and it's really, really good. I wish you guys were enjoying it with me. I just picked it up from the shop. Hey, I just sat down with the incredible, this guy is amazing. I was super inspired after this conversation. His name is Isaac French. You may have heard of him. I happened to have met Isaac a couple years ago through his Airbnb. He built this 7-cabin Airbnb like retreat center. It's like a gated kind of private community, and automated everything. And he built the whole thing basically with him and his brother and his dad. Was in debt about 1.7 million, which is a big project for your first project, grossing $1 million a year after he got the thing up and running, and ended up exiting within 2 years, I think it was. It's $7 million, and he's not even 25 years old. It's crazy, and such an inspiring story. This guy is like a PhD. He doesn't have a PhD. I'm saying he is a PhD in branding and marketing. He just has so much figured out, and I really hope you guys get a lot out of it. If you are in the hospitality space, if you have your thing that you want to be able to tell the story of your business or your brand or yourself, if you want to build an audience online, man, this conversation was rich. And so I hope you guys get a lot out of it. Let's bring on Isaac French. I'm here with Isaac French, who is a real estate investor extraordinaire, like pro at short-term rentals, has already built a business and done a big exit already. So we're going to hear all about his story. How you doing, Isaac?
Good, Cameron. How are you?
Doing great. It's a rainy Monday here in Waco. How long did you drive to get to the studio?
I live about 25 minutes north.
Yeah.
I thought it was like 15. So when I jumped in my car, I was like, "Ooh, I'm going to be late." But
yeah. It's all good, man. So glad you're here. I've seen a lot of your content recently on specifically Threads for me and Instagram. And man, Isaac he's not just doing the work, but like teaching other people how to start short-term rental businesses and just telling the story of other people, and like it fires me up to like want to do more and do bigger stuff. So man, tell us your story. Where are you from? What did you do? How did you do what you've done, and how did you get to where you're at now?
Sure. So I was born and raised right here outside of Waco at Homestead, and I have 9 siblings. So I'm number 5 out of 10, homeschooled, grew up on a farm. My dad had a plumbing business, and my grandpa was a home builder. So was around building all my life. And when I was 12, our family moved up to Idaho, and I lived there for a decade. My dad transitioned from plumbing into general contracting, which was perfect. I was 14, 15, started to work summers, and then just basically learned construction from the ground up, sweeping floors up to project managing in about 4 or 5 years. In my early 20s, was running projects, and eventually moved back to Texas, met and married my wife, Helen, in 2020. And after we came home from our honeymoon, I also was doing bookkeeping and tax prep on the side. That's something else I had learned in high school. And I had a cloud-based accounting business, but bookkeeping and taxes were never really a passion for me. They were something that I really forced myself to learn and was curious about, because it felt like a great foundation as someone who had been starting businesses, which there's some funny stories there. But yeah, I had everything from a craft soda business with blowing up bottles to a typewriter repair shop to.
So you just have the entrepreneurial bug, like from when you're a kid.
It's been my vice since I was young. And so anyway, back in 2020, I just got married, and I had all these different experiences: construction, bookkeeping, and I'm also an artist. So I love painting and drawing. So partly creative as well. And I was sort of thinking, how can I bring together all these different experiences and passions into one project where I can wear many hats and, not be stuck in an office somewhere. And so this idea came to build a village. I didn't really have other terminology, a village of short-term rental cabins. But the important part was the attention to detail, the design, the aesthetic, the vibe, the feeling, and ultimately the experience that I wanted other people to have. And there's that saying about, if you want to build something other people are going to love, build it for yourself, build it for an audience of one, and other people will naturally, fall in behind that. So from that day forward, whenever that was, and I first had the idea, I started thinking, what would I want to stay at? What would I want it to feel like?
Wow.
What would I want it to look like? And I started looking for land. Long story short, a few deals fell through. This was now early 2021. So we were just coming out of COVID. As you know, real estate was just in this one of those crazy explosive periods here in Texas, Central Texas. And nothing was just really coming through, but I kept on collecting ideas. My Pinterest board, really couldn't design it too much because I didn't know what the land was going to be. And then one morning I wake up, open Zillow, and there's this new listing that's 4 hours old. I'll never forget it. It's 5 acres, $133,000, 5 minutes from where I lived. I'd driven by this place hundreds of times and never thought anything of it because from the road, it was just this densely, it was really just a bramble. It was big trees, but you couldn't even see them because there was greenbrier. And but then there was a drone shot and I could see this little cow pond in the middle. So I was like, I got to go check this out.
Wow.
So I drove over, met the realtor. An hour later, I got chills like as I walked onto the property and started to see these massive live oak trees, these 300-year-old majestic icons of Texas, really. And the whole thing came together right then. I was like, I could see those modern Scandinavian cabins with the lights reflecting on the water. And so I knew right then and there. And I had about $19,000 to my name. And so I was like, well, we've got to get this thing under contract. So I the realtor wrote up a contract for 100. I think we got it for about like 127 total. Signed it, 30 days to close, all cash. So then I had to figure out, get the money.
Let's go.
So I started calling friends and family, and some family members agreed to give me a short-term loan for like $100,000 in exchange for an equity offer in the deal. And it was great. It was my, my brothers and my dad. And so we were very comfortable working with each other. I had worked with them in their business. And initially I wanted it like a hard money loan from them because I knew we were going to create a lot of equity.
Yeah.
Like, no, we want to.
That's how I think too. Totally. Yeah.
So then literally from that day forward, it was awesome. Like for the next 30 days till we closed, I was a mad scientist in my living room. So 80 hours each of those 4 weeks, just drawing up plans.
Wow.
So and spending a few days on site as well, like really letting the land sort of speak to me of where do I want each cabin to be and what's the ideal density given the trees, the topography, the views. And so we settled on 7 cabins with a commons area, a laundry, kind of back of house operations area. And then I also was talking to banks, trying to get a construction loan. I'd never had a loan besides like an auto loan. So eventually I got told no a lot.
Wow. So this is your first deal.
First deal.
Wow.
Never done
That's
a deal.
Crazy.
And so then TFNB finally came through.
Okay.
Kevin Dobbs. And
Kevin Dobbs. Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah. Great guy. And he gave me 80% loan to value of appraised value. It was sort of hard to classify the project because it was like short-term rentals, but we also designed them so that they were suitable for a longer term rental if there was a downturn in tourism. And they don't really know, banks don't really know how to think about what I call landscape hotels, micro resorts. Is it camping? Is it even glamping? If that's even a thing. Is it a hotel?
And the numbers are so different depending on how you classify.
So, but long story short, he gave us a loan for 80% of the value with some family members co-guaranteeing it.
Okay.
They used, their liquidity and whatnot to help back it. Now, here's the problem. The appraiser that TFNB hired appraised the whole project value at 1.7-ish million.
Mm-hmm.
I was budgeting like 2 million to actually build it. It ended up costing us 2.3. So
got it.
TFNB only loaned us 80% of the 1.6 or 1.7, whatever that number was. Maybe it's 1.8. So I learned a lot about if I had to do it again, what I tell people now is hire the appraiser proactively. Find the appraiser that the bank is comfortable working with, that is MAI certified and whatnot, but hire them, because when you're the customer versus the bank, there's going to be a lot. Now, this is a little bit of a hot take, and I don't know exactly how it works with the bank, but just enough said by depending on the customer, you're going to have a valuation, and it's going to be lower if the bank is the customer, because of course they're covering their bases, especially on an asset class that's
risk-based.
That's untested to some degree. But it all worked out. My family members had access to a line of credit through their construction business, which got us over line, but we ended up spending, $400,000 more than I was really even budgeting. And that was because I was just unwilling to compromise on anything.
I mean, guys, these are nice cabins. I've stayed in them, and they're like, they're top of the line. Like,
and the other crazy part was it was 2021. So I mean, you probably were trying to do construction around here too, but it was really tough. Supply chain delays, just subcontractors availability was crazy, almost non-existent. And we designed and built the entire thing in 9.5 months. So we closed that March 30th, 2021. The next day I was on site with a chainsaw clearing with my buddies and laying it all out. And then we opened on January 10th, 2022. Now in November, I broke my pelvis. I fell from a ladder one day in one of the cabins. That was a much more substantial injury than I thought. And so I was on crutches for the last 3 months of the project, was in the hospital, multiple surgeries.
Dang.
But I recovered great, and I had incredible support from my friends and such. But yeah, so then we launch. It's this, beautiful transportive setting. You drive through the gate, everything from like the entryway to the trails, the lights, the cabins, the positions, the way that each view is framed from each cabin. It's very intentional.
Yeah.
And so I was pumped. We launched. We had a fantastic first 2 weeks on Airbnb. And I always sort of thought, well, it'd be cool to build a brand and like a direct audience here. Yes. But I was very intentionally launching exclusively on Airbnb because I knew we would be getting a little boost there. That's what they do to new listings. Well, one day I wake up, all of my listings are grayed out with this little red infamous triangle I'll never forget. It's just like tattooed into my brain that morning because there was no warning. There was no explanation. And when I got on the phone, I realized quickly, this isn't going anywhere. Like, they couldn't help me. They're like, we don't know, kind of tough luck, to be honest.
Oh my gosh.
And so that, forced me to do some soul searching over the next few days and figure out, what are we going to do? I'm 24 years old. I've just spent $2.3 million of other people's money. And now
all your bookings disappeared.
My bookings disappeared.
Wow.
So,
guys, can you imagine?
They say metaphorically, don't ever build your house on someone else's land. And that was the best lesson I could have ever learned at that stage. So long story short, got in touch with a travel influencer in Dallas and paid her $950. She made a giveaway post to leverage her following, which was around 200,000 on Instagram. And I had basically nothing, and ran that giveaway. And 7 days later, we had $40,000 of bookings.
Holy moly.
Through a website I just spun up sort of like overnight. Actually built it with somebody here in town, but had to sort of like build out the direct bookings portion of it, payment processing and calendar integration and whatnot. And then 5,000 followers from scratch, basically. So
crazy.
Here's the craziest part. Then a day later, we get reinstated on Airbnb. But the timing couldn't have been more perfect, because if I hadn't had that warning, that wake-up call, I would have probably never taken Instagram serious, or it would have been much further down the road before I'd actually taken Instagram seriously.
Totally.
As it was, we were able to get relisted, which was helpful because we still got Airbnb bookings. But from that day forward, fast forward 6 months, we were at 70+% direct.
Crazy.
The rest of it orphan nights.
And just to give people an idea, like, how much money are you saving without Airbnb in the picture? I mean,
roughly 15%. So what we do is we discount the direct stays by like 2%. So we can still advertise that it's cheapest to book with us direct.
Mm-hmm.
First, I discounted it a lot more, but then I realized people don't really care. As long as you tell them they're getting a discount, you can actually improve the experience booking with you direct.
Yeah.
Though Airbnb has thought very carefully and they've succeeded for, one of the funny things about Airbnb is they're a design-led company. So Chesky is a designer by trade. And so is Joe Gebbia. They met in design school. Most startups, most platforms are not necessarily built by designers. So they very, very much understand the booking process, the discovery process, and they optimize the platform for that. So there's a lot of lessons with the funnel that you build out for direct that you can just learn by looking exactly at what the best OTA on the planet does.
Yeah.
But so you save 15% pure profit. You can't ever be canceled, obviously. And you own the relationship. So there's no data wall there. You can directly retarget the guest, bring them back. And also you're reaching a more aspirational guest because they're finding you through a video immersive format, as in scrolling through reels on their favorite social media platform. And they're not anchoring you against 20 other listings and basically turning you into a little bit of a commodity. So now the way I like to think about it is the hospitality industry, and this really applies across the board in today's experiential economy, but the hospitality industry, whether it's hotels, Airbnbs, or anywhere in that spectrum, is going to fall into two simple buckets. And it is a spectrum, but it's either commodity or experiential. Like today's guests do not care. I say, and you got to be careful not to speak too categorically because there's always some transient
nuance,
business travel and very economy minded people. But a lot of guests, the majority of guests, are looking for experiences, one of a kind, unique, Instagrammable moments. And so this is a massive opportunity. And we can get into some of that a little later. But just to finish out the Live Oak Lake story, fast forward our first year, we grossed $1 million and net 550,000 on seven cabins. We grew like about 100,000 on Instagram in that first 12 months, 80% direct bookings and 95% occupancy overall, which was just mind-blowing to me.
That's crazy.
So what I realized is initially we had a lot of people coming to Magnolia and Baylor and whatnot, but then as that Instagram following started ticking up, we became this destination. And then whatever else was going on in Waco, people would go check out, which is pretty cool to realize like we could actually build it.
Yeah, you're the reason people are coming.
Yeah, we like brought
that's what you're saying, rather than
traffic.
Magnolia.
People came from like Europe to stay there, which is
I believe it.
Absolutely,
I believe it.
So then we started getting approached by private equity, and actually that first year we were open because I think they started to see. And I started to tell the story a little bit. They started to see like the writing is on the wall for these commoditized stays, and these folks are building a brand, and that's what's really valuable here.
Wow,
that's the hardest part, probably.
Yeah,
but a lot of people
following, and
But the hardest part behind that is actually building something that's worthy of word of mouth marketing and of a brand. So that was flattering to start getting these different offers and whatnot, but it was also like the business was just getting better and better, and we were getting more and more efficient. And I was able to automate 90% of like the operations with the smart home tech and 2 part-time employees running everything. And just the way we had designed everything to work together. It's of course, contactless check-in, and yet there are very thoughtful and intentional touch points throughout the customer journey that makes them feel cared for. Like even the intentionality of the welcome gift and the handwritten note and the fresh baked cookies, which operationally are actually like, there's a lot that goes into getting fresh baked cookies that day and having a handwritten note customized to that guest. And, the welcome gift with the welcome book with the message from us as the host, my wife and I. But really, it's just a system. Once you create that system, then you can bring people in, train them to do that. So whether it's the cleaners who have access through the property management software to see how many guests are coming, and so does the bakery, and on their way to the property, they pick up the cookies. That's just one little example, but I realized we could systematize a lot of it and still keep those little touch points that made the guest feel like me, Isaac, and my wife, Helen, were the hosts and were caring for them. So that
Right.
was a lot of fun to like put all those pieces together and let the machine run. But then we ended up listing it for sale because I've always been of the mentality like,
Yeah.
look, we're gonna just put this thing at a price that it would be really hard, if not impossible, for us to turn down
Yeah.
if somebody really wanted to pay that.
Yeah.
So
And
we get
dude, I remember seeing it on LoopNet. Like I opened LoopNet because I'm always looking at
yeah.
stuff, and I was like, "There's Live Oak Lake. What the heck? They've been open like 6 months, I think,
Yeah.
or something." So
We weren't in a position to like need to sell it, but it was just
sure,
one of those
why
things.
not?
Yeah.
Let's see what people. Yeah.
So
see
anyway,
what people will buy.
we actually got under contract, and we're gonna close at a really good offer, and then a couple days before we were supposed to close, the whole deal fell through, and they hadn't put nearly enough earnest money down. So that I learned an important lesson there. Barely even covered my attorney's fees to get us that far.
Dang.
And just the emotional roller coaster of selling an asset like that I'd put so much of my heart and soul into was tough. But then literally 2 days later, after falling out, we get another offer for 500,000 higher.
Wow.
And this other offer was like the highest we'd ever heard. So I've been public. One of the things that I sort of really like to do is just be transparent with all the numbers. So we ended up selling for 7 million. So that's $1 million a key. And that included the social media following. And there were a lot of other, roadblocks that almost derailed that deal, but it all came through. Last October 2023. And so it's been just over a year now since getting totally out of that. And yeah, it was bittersweet for sure. But I've also been really privileged to now connect with so many other builders across the country and across the world that have very similar stories and properties. And so I'm actually just like in the stage now where I love not just telling my story, but hearing their stories and learning and visiting their properties, because I want to do another project for sure. But the puck is still moving, and I'm still chasing it. And I want to create something that really pushes the bar past where it even was with Live Oak Lake. And the opportunity is so ripe right now, Cameron. It's crazy how much demand. I could tell you story after story after story of these folks that are just crushing it. I'll give you one example. There's a friend of mine. Have you heard of Devin Lowrop? Okay, you got to look him up on Instagram. He built a shipping container home.
I might have seen him on your content.
Containers. Maybe so. Okay. I haven't really posted about him much, but I need to. And they're like cantilevered over each other. He's 24 years old. He designed it himself. He built it all himself with like 2 scopes of work that he subcontracted out. And he documented it on his iPhone with a $20 tripod from Amazon. And he grew 1.5 million followers in 12 months.
What?
Between TikTok and it's the most followed Airbnb on earth as far as I can see. And the place is absolutely crazy. Now he's at like 100,000 on YouTube, and he's just absolutely exploding. He built a second unit on the property. This is in Washington State. He's gotten offers, as you can imagine, from everyone you can imagine to buy that, to build other houses, to have a show. He can do whatever he wants because he built an audience, because he built something that was amazing, and he told the story. So like, that's just one example. It's incredible, whether it's treehouse resorts, floating homes, anything that's innovative and unique and that has a story behind it. People absolutely love.
Dude, that's amazing. Can we just recap? Like, how old were you when you had the $19,000 and you found the land?
23.
$19,000, finds this land, builds, a destination for people, did most of the work himself, partnered with relationships, family and friends, went 1.7 million into debt, and then exited a year and a half later at $7 million, overnight millionaire, Isaac French. And now he's helping other people do the same thing. And man, what a powerful story. I've never actually, gotten to sit down with you and hear the whole story. Of course, last time we talked, you were just then launching Live Oak Lake. So super cool, man.
Yeah, I met you because Corey O'Connell was filming some promotional stuff for Live Oak a couple months after we opened, and we really needed some models to come out for some of the lifestyle stuff. And he said, "Oh, I know this couple that would be perfect. They're a lot more than just good models for this project. Like you would really love some of their projects. And so we got to connect, but then
Yeah.
it's been really fun watching your journey too. Like we were talking about it offline, but I'm fascinated by like the idea of having multiple prongs, whether it's a coffee shop, just a single family rental, some short-term rental,
Yeah.
but especially like the hospitality component of the coffee shop, because hospitality is really hard,
It
traditionally
is.
seen as hard, but it's so fulfilling.
Yeah.
And what I love about,
Especially when you can automate everything like Isaac did.
yeah, but even when you can, like the beauty of the coffee shop is you're creating, and this layers in perfectly to like a micro resort, because you got to create a vibe, you got to create a feeling, and people really are essential to that on some level.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes into placemaking and lighting and plants and landscaping, whatever. But like I've been to your coffee shop several times, and you definitely have a vibe there. And I think that's the hardest part. Once you have that, you can add on accommodations. My whole model too is like build out of town, where it's a lot easier to do all that. And it's more nature immersive, but like that's the hard part in a lot of ways.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Okay. So I'm curious about the story thing, especially with Devin and just like audience. And I mean, my biggest question is, do you have to be in the grind doing the work to have a story? Because I am like, I want to be able to tell a story and bring people along, but it feels like a lot of work, which building an audience is a lot of work. But how can someone who's like, let's say 50, doesn't want to be building a container home, but wants to like tell the story? I mean, what would you say to those people that kind of want to build something and tell the story and document it, but just aren't really sure where to start? And they're like, I don't know if I want to do that.
When you just to sharpen that a little bit, when you say don't want to do that, are you saying they don't want to tell the story, like they don't want to be on camera, or they don't want to actually be out there swinging a hammer?
Swinging hammers.
Got it. So stories are all about authenticity and you being you and not trying to play some role that you're not.
Yeah.
So that's like number one. That being said, I think it's really powerful when people push themselves out of their comfort zones and they make themselves vulnerable, and they're willing to do that publicly. And before they have all their ducks in a row, they can start to share their journey. And that does a few things. Number one, it actually helps them build the muscle, whether that's creating the videos, understanding hooks, and when we're talking about stories, are we talking about, I think short form videos are primary channel for that, because it's like that's kind of how our world operates these days. But I started telling the story after Live Oak Lake was built on Twitter, of all places. And I actually really recommend this. I would have never gotten on Twitter, but there was this guy who I just happened to get connected to, who's actually kind of like a big deal somewhat. His name is Sam Parr. And have you ever heard of The Hustle? It was like a business newsletter for millennials.
Yeah.
And he built that and then sold it to
on it for a
HubSpot.
second. Okay.
Yeah. And back in the day, it was very inventive, like what he did.
Cool.
Built a big newsletter business. And now he has a big podcast and does other stuff. But he heard the story. We started texting. He was like, hey, I'm going to tweet about this. You should go create an account. And I was like, I do not have time. That's where people argue about politics and whatever. And I'm not into it. And so he made this tweet and it went like really viral. So then I created an account in the wake of that, and it took me probably 2 months to even figure out like, what is this platform? How do I use it? But what Twitter is great for is forcing you to write extremely concisely, to cut to the chase, to create stories, and especially with the threads format. And now Instagram has threads, which is a similar format to it. But you're creating these little bite-sized pieces that are strung together in a compelling story. That's typically what works. So I basically learned copywriting and storytelling just by writing these threads on Twitter, and then started to get traction a couple months into it. And so grew that to about 40,000, which is really hard to grow on Twitter unless you're like already famous. Much harder than Instagram from what I found recently. But it was the best for me because I was sort of like honing these skills that were going to be very useful when it came to the video side. So then recently I started turning those threads, and whether it was my story or other people's projects, into short form videos. And there's so many different styles. You can do the green screen, which is kind of what I've done, but like really produced because I'm kind of a perfectionist. But you can do it a lot less produced. I have a buddy, Chris Karner. You've probably seen his content because he's absolutely exploding. He's at 430,000 followers and he started at 0 like 3 months ago.
What?
It's insane. You got to look it up. It's called Karner Office, but basically he has these business ideas or he'll see them and then he'll in 20 minutes record a video. I mean, it looks really sloppy and cut together, but he's a great storyteller. He can cut to the chase. He's fresh. He's not the guru nonsense and people love it. It's authentic.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of examples, but what I would say, just to wrap it all up, for no matter who you are, be authentic. You really have to overcome the fear. This is what I had to do of not looking perfect, not having the perfect story. So many people also have imposter syndrome. I think
who doesn't, man?
I'm a poster child of that though. Like everyone's better at this and that and the other thing. Everybody does. But I have another friend, Harrison Hyde, and I'm just throwing these out. I hope you and your listeners will look them up because I think like I've learned so much from these as case studies. He's in the UK. He's 23 years old. He worked on Wall Street. He's a bright kid. Ended up actually having like this really bad hangover after a party one time. And was like, I'm done with alcohol. I can't do this anymore. So he was like, I'm going to build a lifestyle around alcohol-free fun, essentially. So he concepted this members club that is super awesome in the English countryside, 2 hours from London. And it's all alcohol free. Like that's one of the selling points. And so he's attracting a whole community and a tribe of people around that and telling his story. His reels are genius. And he's at 166,000 followers. He hasn't even secured a piece of land for this project yet. He's just telling the story of like, here's where I came from and here's my plan. So he's a great example.
Wow.
And he's told me he's gotten, I mean, he's right now raising money. He's raised like a few $1 million. He doesn't have a track record. He doesn't have a property. He doesn't come from money.
Just a story and a following.
That's it.
Wow. Dude, do you have any tips or advice or maybe even a resource that or you could just go watch Isaac's stuff and learn hooks and learn how to tell stories, but like how did you learn this stuff? I feel like I'm still growing, very much growing, and want to learn how to tell stories quickly and concisely. And what advice do you have?
There's actually a course, and I don't have any kind of an affiliate deal or anything, but it was helpful to me, called Cut 30, CUTE30.co. And it's a cohort-based short form course. 30 days, you make 30 videos. I didn't make 30 videos. I just watched and sort of lurked on there, but I learned a lot from it.
Love it.
The whole idea is really get the reps in, but they teach you hooks 101, pacing 101. They do show different tracks. Like you could be a builder, an expert, or a brand. So you have like 3 different tracks, and then you could do vlog, you could do green screen, you could do whatever. And so that's really helpful. A friend of mine, Hans Lorai, who's also blown up on Instagram recently, who does interior design videos, he took that course. He had 0 followers, and today he has 570,000 in 1 year.
Crazy.
Just these green screen videos of design hacks. And he's not even an interior designer by trade. He's a realtor, but he loves design and he's passionate about it. That's the other thing. You gotta be passionate about it.
Yeah.
Be obsessive about your thing, and that will naturally attract people to you.
Yeah.
The content will just be way better too.
Yeah.
Like, you need that energy. So that's a great video resource. And then copywriting really is just an underrated, undertaught skill, in my opinion. Like the idea of really compelling, concise advertising writing. Writing is the most powerful communication. I mean, it's more powerful than people give it credit for. That's why email is still the #1 marketing channel, really across every business and across every industry. We didn't even talk about that with like Live at Blake, or what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But email is extremely valuable, but you have to learn the slippery slope. Sam Parr, the guy I actually mentioned, has a really great copywriting course called Copy That I highly recommend. And the idea is it's 2 weeks, but it's just 5 days a week. So 10 days, you get an email each day with one of his favorite pieces of like sales copy that was ever written. So it might be
Whoa.
a Rolex ad,
Yeah.
or it might be a letter that somebody wrote to their son. There's all kinds. The Wall Street Journal main advertising thing that they used for like 100 years that sold $2 billion of subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal. And these are just like these masterfully crafted pieces of copy.
Yeah.
And then he'll kind of highlight certain things like the rhythm here, the words that he used here,
Wow.
the texture of the writing here, whatever it is, the sentence length, but really short, punchy sentences. And then you, by hand, and this is important, write down exactly and copy letter for letter what was written. And Sam told me to this day, before he goes and writes an important piece of copy, an email, whatever it is, an advertisement, he will go and copy for like 10 minutes, just something that he likes.
Yeah.
And like musicians do this too, though. This is
Wow.
how musicians learn a lot of times. Like they'll go and copy other people's work. This is how you learn a lot of things. But I think in school, a lot of us are taught writing as like, you need to use more words. You need to have a big vocabulary. And I'm all for having a big vocabulary. I'm not like saying we should dumb the English language down, but you need to learn if you really want to get people's attention, and attention is the most valuable currency these days. Well, trust actually is, but you need attention to get that trust.
Yeah.
You have to get their attention, and being long and boring is not a virtue. So that skill of copywriting translates so beautifully into storytelling and videos, speaking as well.
Beautiful. There you go, guys. If you're out there making content and need to learn to tell stories, there's some resources for you. Hey, I want to go back to Airbnb demand. Well, not just Airbnb, but hospitality demand. There's a lot of voices out there that I've seen that are like, Airbnb's dead, you know, it's on the downhill, but you seem to think the opposite. So talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was saying there's two types of stays, commodity versus experiential. And that applies to hotels as much as it applies to Airbnbs, but it certainly applies to Airbnbs. Here's the thing with Airbnb. When they came onto the scene and disrupted hotels, the whole idea was mom and pop investors, homeowners, whomever that had an extra bedroom. And it was really cool. There was actually a story associated with that. You were sort of coming for an experience as much as you were coming for a place to stay.
Totally.
That was the genesis of Airbnb. And then people started realizing there's a lot of opportunity here, and they got a lot of good press. And so what happened? A bunch of investors flooded the market, and no shade on them. I mean, it was a great opportunity. There was an arbitrage there. There was a general just, hunger for something other than the hotel model. But then you had a lot of the commoditization and standardization, and, it became impossible to differentiate. And again, there's still some segment of the market, whether that's 20%, 50%, we may argue about it, that's always just going to be there, whether that's, the Holiday Inn Express or my neighbor's Airbnb down the street, and they don't really care about some of these things. Okay. Consistency is a big issue that a lot of people have had with Airbnb, but as long as you're kind of at that baseline, it's consistent, it's clean, it's fairly modern and up to date. Cool. There's going to be a place for that. There is a lot of regulation, which is also coming in and hurting in a lot of cities and such. But where things get really interesting is when you, again, create something that does not exist, that the big brands, including the resorts like Four Seasons, can't compete with because they don't have the intimacy, the boutique, the story ultimately behind that. And so, that could be anything from I have a friend who's doing, I've told some already, but I've got another friend who is doing these floating homes, and I can't believe how well he's doing. It costs him like $100,000 to build these things. And it's basically a houseboat reimagined. It's a mini yacht, but it's just well done. He bypasses all the regulations. And so he's in these markets in a downtown harbor where it's banned, and the Airbnb is banned in the city. There's a $1,500 a night hotel on the waterfront, but he's got a 360 view. He can move if there ever is a regulation issue.
Oh my gosh.
And he's getting $700 to $1,000 a night, booking out, building a huge brand on Instagram. And now he's doing it in multiple markets. Now he's buying marinas, and he's going to do a floating coffee shop, a floating pickleball, floating sauna,
floating pickleball,
everything floating. people are dying. Ryan Trahan just went and stayed in one of them I saw the other day.
Oh my gosh.
And like, so he's like getting all these celebrities and YouTubers
Yeah.
and people, because it's unique.
Who is this and what's his
name
handle?
Is Brian Meyer. His company is called Flow Home, FLOHOM.
That's so cool.
Great case study. So he's got a great story and he's scaling it sustainably. So that's the other thing with hospitality, whether it's Airbnb portfolios, a micro resort model, even, you've got to be careful not to build more just because you can, whether you have the resources or you have the land for it. There is an ideal optimum number for every piece of property where and to me, that's like, generally speaking, 5 to 20 units. It could be a little bit more. I have a friend, have you heard of Ben Wolf? So he's like really kind of a rising star for sure. He's a lot more sophisticated than I am in a lot of ways. He built a property called Onera in Fredericksburg. Very similar story to mine, actually. The same time that I was building Live Oak Lake, we didn't know about each other. It's a 12-unit micro resort, essentially. He's got tree houses. He's got some like safari tents and other stuff, but did really well. Just, executed well with the details and then the marketing. And he ended up selling to a publicly traded REIT a year before we sold Live Oak Lake. Wasn't quite the same valuation per key, but still like really impressive.
Yeah.
I think he sold for like 6 million or 7 million for 12 keys, but really cool. The first institutional exit that I know of in the space. And now he just unveiled his $22 million 28 unit landscape hotel in Wimberley. So it's spyglass units. They're like these tubes that it's on this hilltop in Wimberley, just fantastic views.
What?
And they're blended into the landscape. So like embedded in the trees.
Yeah.
And then he's doing another project in Fredericksburg, but he's probably like the most institutionalized of any of these developers because he's raising a lot of money, obviously. But I think one thing we've talked about a lot is I think he's pushing it with like the 28 units. You start seeing some oversaturation a little bit of within the unit type.
Okay.
And then, you're just going to have a little bit less of a draw. So you got to be careful with, I was saying you want to have distinction, differentiation between the units. So the guests come and they're like, oh, this is amazing, but I really want to stay over at that one.
Yeah.
It's just another reason to come back. But I also think that, there is a perfect economies of scale number there where you can save a lot on the infrastructure, on the build cost, on the operations. Because in some of these properties, you may need to hire a full-time GM. Like we were kind of just at that threshold where we didn't really need it. We had a part-time person, but that was a really specialized role that we had to be the perfect person for. So I would say like 10 to 20 is the sweet spot, but you could also just have like a 1-unit stay that's insane, like Devin's shipping container home. That's mind-blowing. I love the model in general of starting small, start with 1 unit, maybe 3 units that are incredible.
Yeah.
I have another friend in Wisconsin. This is a really cool property called Nordlys. That's Nordlys. They had a budget. They bought 140 acres. They had some money. They had like a few $100,000, but they wanted to spend a total of like 1.5 building 5 cabins. Well, they only ended up building 2, and they spent the whole budget on those 2. But they're insane.
Yeah.
They built this tower. It's like iconic now. It's 2 stories in this meadow, just incredible Nordic design. And then they built another one that's handicap accessible and just so the story was his mom had cancer and they didn't think she was going to live more than like a year. So they were spending all their time up on their property, and they realized we should build a cabin that would accommodate her.
Yeah.
And so they did. It's wheelchair accessible. And then she miraculously recovered. Wow. So now they have this beautiful cabin, and they host all these terminally ill and wheelchair bound folks. And it's incredible because they also said there's a huge opportunity there where these guests tell them, look, we never find cool places to stay. Yeah. We're just beautiful nature immersed places because people just don't think of that. They don't design around that. So if you're building 5 or 10, at least do one that is 88. Yeah. But anyway, they built 2, spent like almost $1 million a piece on them, but they're insane. And now they've built such a brand around it. Now they're going to do a 20-unit landscape hotel. And that's like the Tesla model almost. They built the Roadster. established the brand, made electric cars cool,
see if people buy,
super high ticket. And then they kind of democratized one level to the Model S. Then they democratized it even further. And I think that's a really smart model because it's really putting the value and the emphasis on that brand. You can have a world-class brand with one unit.
Wow.
People need to understand that. And it's valuable. Like the Live Oak Lake exit is proof of that. And the brand was a big part of that valuation. That these big companies, whether it's private equity or a hotel. So the big news in the experiential hospitality space, 2 days ago, Marriott just bought Getaway. Are you familiar with Getaway?
Yes.
It's like 1,200 cabins. And to be fair, I don't think they're that cool. I mean, they're like postage stamp size. But they're, it's definitely in the experiential outdoor play and space. It's a play in that space. And it's undisclosed, but they sold for a pretty penny. And a big part of that is they have 1 million followers on Instagram. They have a brand, and Marriott can't build that.
Yeah.
So they need to work with operators, creators that could be, start me and you that are starting on, I didn't even come from hospitality, but people that have this dream. So whatever it is, tree houses, floating homes. The story that I've told a lot recently. Did you see the train car story?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was crazy. $3,000 for a train car that was like rotting.
I think that's what's like so gripping, and that's the hook of the story. It's like, oh, I have $3,000 bucks, that's cool.
And how many people would have overlooked it? Credit to my dad for seeing the potential, but we restored it completely, and it's booked out. It was on a national TV show, and then I made this thread about it on X and over the summer that got 20 million views. It was just insane, and that prompted like stories in all these publications, Business Insider and the New York Post and Vice, and people were just writing stories without even.
I think you were on Entrepreneur.
It was like 10 different ones, and then from that, somebody at CNBC saw it, and so we just got them filming, and they just released a documentary on CNBC.
So cool, man!
And in the last 7 days since that went live, we got $10,000 of bookings. I just checked with my dad. So like attention is valuable, and you can build that. One final piece of advice here: word of mouth has always been and will always be the most valuable channel for marketing, and social media is essentially a way to leverage word of mouth, that trust that you have in your friend or some influencer, some personal brand.
Wow.
But you have to earn that status to be word of mouth worthy. That's the phrase that I like, because ultimately, like, you could spend all the money you want on a mediocre portfolio or a mediocre property in terms of marketing it, or even trying to fix it up, but that doesn't really have the soul and the true, just that it factor. And it's going to be at best like a marginal impact. Like you may, you could buy millions of dollars of ads or whatever. You could pay all these influencers, but it's not going to ultimately drive like the kind of hype and attention and audience around it, like a community of people like Live Oak Lake and some of these other stories have. So.
Dang, I was going to ask you, I feel like we're getting a PhD in marketing and branding over here with Isaac. I was going to ask you for like one more 2-minute, piece of advice, but you did it, man. Like that was some good meat there. If you're speak to someone real quick. Sorry. I'll leave the marketing thing and branding in a second, but for someone who is not in hospitality, who's just, I don't know, like, I don't know, maybe you have a really good, like dishwasher detergent that's like really earth friendly or whatever. Like, what advice do you give the people that aren't maybe in such a sexy, industry?
Man, that's a great question. I'm not any kind of expert here, by the way. I know what I know from learning firsthand. But if you're passionate, I think I would go back to what I said about being obsessive. If you are obsessive about it, it could be the most boring, overlooked, mundane piece of your daily life. This is what works on social media. This is what works in terms of spreading the word with other people, getting on other people's shows, or getting attention, getting free press, which we did a lot of with Live Oak Lake. Be a nerd about it, like totally, just get into it, and that's just infectious. Like people have to, they love other people that feel passionate about what they're doing. And for me, I would tie it all back to this. Live Oak Lake, what it really was at the end of the day was, it was a platform in nature that we were sending people that we could go ourselves to just relax, decompress, hear the birds. And it was literally in our backyard here in Waco. It wasn't
Yeah.
that far out of town, but you really feel, I mean, you stayed there, so
Yeah.
I'll let you speak
It's
to
incredible.
your own experience, but you really do feel like you're kind of in a different little world
Oh
there.
my gosh. It does not feel like Waco.
And I would just say nature, to tie it all together, to me, is the place where we all feel the most alive. And so whatever you're doing, like that's my advice. Somehow tie it to that, because, and even as like a believer, I think that humans were made to be in nature. Like they were placed in a garden, and that was not random. Like there's something to that.
Yeah.
And so like, even if you're in a city and you can, you know, you could apply this in terms of an interior design tip for your Airbnb in town, like use real plants, add windows, like create even like a little tiny garden outside or something. Bring life into the setting that you are, and people are going to feel that. Even if they can't articulate it, they're going to feel alive. So I can be obsessive about all this, and even the experiential hospitality brand, to me, what that really ties back to its core is this right here, because that's where I feel the most alive and what I'm really passionate about. And even, you know, I think it's okay to say this because I know you're a believer, and this is part of your,
I was going to ask
your platform.
you. Yeah, this is like where I was going to go next. So you go.
I was just going to say, the way I even think of like, or one of the ways that I think of evangelism and shining the light that I have is not even so much in like speaking words. I want to totally be prepared to do that and be bold enough to do that. But by providing a place and by living a life that speaks much louder than those words could. And, you know, I would tie it all back to one experience that I had recently at this place called Babylon Storen in South Africa. And I had dreamed about this place for a long time. It's the most beautiful garden on earth, as far as I'm concerned. It's unbelievable. We went there and stayed there. And with all of these sky high expectations, it's famous. It's, you know, it's a big deal. It's like a 1,500 acre estate. There's 40 accommodations. They have vineyards and this 8-acre garden and 3 world-class restaurants and olive oil and balsamic vinegar making and cheese making. And it's just insane how over the top it is. But I was walking through this garden and I literally got emotional. Like I felt things I had never even up until that point registered, I don't think, of this sense of beauty and care. Like, okay, God is the ultimate artist here, but then like other humans that were made in the image of God created this setting by tending it that is magical. Like I don't have words for it. And I don't even think a lot of the folks that work there, I think actually are people of faith, but it's definitely not part of their explicit mission or anything, but like they're making a huge impact on people. And so to me, like that's what it's really all about.
Beautiful, man. So besides that, I was going to ask you, how are you bringing God into your work, even with what you're doing now? Like,
So I think hospitality is beautiful because it's ultimately about serving other people. And so that's another thing that really fires me up about it, besides the nature component. I realize like I think humans are made to thrive, and I certainly feel this way in giving and serving and loving. And Live Oak Lake was another way to do that, by providing this experience, by caring for people. It's all about caring, genuine care, surprising them, going above and beyond. And then I started writing a newsletter about a year ago. And I started just like freely sharing a lot of tips, and I still do every week, about experiential hospitality and creating these properties. But I also started this one issue that I wrote back in May. I talked about my faith for the first time publicly in that setting. And I was a little scared too, just because I kind of built up a following at that point, and I didn't want to alienate people and all that. Didn't want to offend people, but I just tied it like, look, my why here is I want my business, I want my profession, I want my personal life to have perfect harmony, to be in perfect harmony, and to feel no dissonance in how I'm living in my, you know, in my 9 to 5 or whatever that looks like, versus Sunday or any other time with my family in my home. And hospitality was a way for me in getting into this space where I could really put that into practice. And I
Yeah.
still have so much to work on. And I find myself, just those little moments like where you're driving and someone cuts you off, or you're in a hurry and
Yeah.
something's going wrong. It's like you have that reaction. I do, at least, because I'm an intense person and I'm always in a hurry. But I've realized even in the hospitality space, and just even by thinking and writing and praying about some of this, like there's so many moments throughout my day and in my job where I can make someone else's day better at a minimum, not make it worse by adding just my little ordinary, action of kind of whatever retaliation if someone does something, but actually doing what Jesus really would do here and going out of my way. And so it doesn't have to be at odds with the business side of it. Like Live Oak Lake was a very profitable, extremely successful. People wanted to come over and over again. And I think it was having that heart and soul for hospitality. That was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And so now in the newsletter, I wrote about that, and I never had so many people respond to it positively and like, man, this like touched me. But also, like, I had more unsubscribes than I've ever had. But I was like, this is okay. Like, if you were offended by that, then too bad. But I love the people aspect. Like, that's why I'm doing this podcast. I love talking to other people. I love learning from other people. And I think as humans, we're at our best when we're loving and serving other people. And I have a lot to give. I've been given a lot.
Yeah, I feel. Gosh, I did it's called Teen Staff Volunteer Program at a camp in Kansas City almost every summer growing up, and I would say that serving other people and like learning to be outward focused. My dad calls it the outward effect. Just like learning to serve other people really changed my life, and I've seen it change so many other people's life when you can get out, like just stop looking at yourself and look at other people. But man, so cool. You really are glorifying God and everything that you're doing. And man, I feel like we just scratched the surface, and I feel like we could keep going for a lot longer. But man, tell us two things. The first one, what does it mean to you to leave a legacy? I know you have one child, another one on the way. Whether it's family or whatever, what does it mean to you to leave a legacy, both spiritually and financially? And then after that, I'll ask one more question.
I heard a saying the other day that says you should judge a man by his grandchildren. And that really hit me. And it immediately made me think of my own grandpa, who passed away last year, but he was so impactful in my life and in all my siblings and in so many other people's. One thing about him that I really admire is he was so understated, and he was obsessive about sort of the quality that we've been describing. He was a home builder, but he was the most humble, meekest, just, I have a biased view, but the best grandpa ever. And I'm not trying to hold myself up as an example, but I see a lot of good fruit even in my siblings and his grandchildren. And so I would say the same thing about my dad, who has 12 grandchildren, I think, of his own already now too. But I think having a generational kind of approach at the way that you raise your children, at the decisions you make, at the sacrifices that you're really willing to make when things aren't always easy. And I won't get into the stories, but there were so many of those in my parents' and grandparents' lives. And I definitely want to be willing to make the same sacrifice and serve to the same degree and to love with the same kind of love in the way they did, so that my grandchildren hopefully someday will, they may not even really remember me. Maybe it'll spring up in ways that I don't even expect, but there'll be a legacy there that ultimately didn't start with me and hopefully won't end with me.
Wow. Judge a man by his grandchildren. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Man. Okay, last thing, man. We didn't even talk about what you're doing now, but just give us a glimpse. Where can people find you? Where can they reach out to you? You're relatively public, I would say. I can't even believe you agreed to come on this podcast. It's awesome.
I love connecting with Waco folks. You're my neighbors.
Love it.
So I write this newsletter, which is really something my passion. I spend a couple hours a week writing that. Do you read it?
I don't.
Would love to be honored to have you as a reader.
Let's get on it. Yeah.
So if you go to isaacjfrench.com, you can subscribe. And I write about experiential hospitality once a week. And then, I'm on most social platforms at Isaac French _.
Love it. Man, what a time with Isaac. Guys, I would love if you would drop me a DM, drop Isaac a DM, just, tell him something that you got out of this. That would be awesome. And gosh, there's really so many different directions we could have gone from here. I mean, I feel like just scratching the surface. So please, guys, follow Isaac. He's an amazing storyteller and, has even some educational stuff that he's doing also. So follow him, learn from him, and give him all your money too.
No.
Awesome, dude. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Cameron. Appreciate it.